Good evening to you all. Very warm welcome to ETV News. I'm Grum Tariku. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, along with First Ladies Nash Tayacho and a high-level delegation, has arrived in Djibouti for an official visit. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and his delegation have been received by President Omar Gile upon his arrival at Djibouti city. Ethiopia and Djibouti signed agreement to jointly work on education and training, security and peacekeeping areas in March 2022. The Ministries of Foreign Affairs and Finance, in collaboration with the Ethiopian Diaspora Agency and the Ethiopian missions worldwide, launched on September 13 a month-long campaign to mobilize resources for national causes. Speaking on the occasion, Minister of Finance Ahmed Shide, Ambassador Burtukan Ayano urged all Ethiopian missions organized into clusters to jump right into the campaign and expedite the mobilization of much-needed resources. The conference recognized the accomplishments made last year in terms of resource mobilization for multiple national causes and the use of technology to achieve the goal, but it also identified the gaps in transaction channels and account communication. State Minister Burtukan, for her part, urged cluster coordinator missions and all missions to strengthen cooperation with Ethiopians, people of Ethiopian origin and friends of Ethiopia by leveraging technology and implementing creative and user-friendly mechanisms to achieve allocated resource mobilization. Danielson Cass, a well-known activist, exposed the abuse of power that has been exercised by the WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom. In a latest video he shared, Cass said the WHO Director General is financing and covering all inhuman acts orchestrated by TPLF cliques, adding under Adhanom's leadership, the WHO has grossly politicized the health sector in Ethiopia. Take a look.
Tedros is the highest ranking medical official in the world. He isn't even a real medical doctor. In fact, he's the first ever to lead the World Health Organization without a medical degree. See, Tedros, he's actually a politician who hired a public relations firm in the United States to help him get the lucrative top job at the WHO. He's a communist revolutionary who oversaw a violent government in Ethiopia from several senior positions. From health minister to foreign affairs, Tedros routinely used his power for self-promotion at the expense of his people. But don't take it from me. Take it from one of his subordinates in Ethiopia back when he was health minister. Despite their position in the government bureaucracy, they penned an essay about how, quote, Dr. Tedros left the Ethiopian health sector very much politicized and crippled, which must yet be depoliticized if it is to function properly, where doctors, quote, use their smartphone flashlights to help deliver babies at night and had no running water to wash their hands after treating an infectious patient. That is the legacy of Dr. Tedros. Back in Ethiopia, when he was only responsible for the death of his own citizens, he was a ranking official in the Tigray People's Liberation Front. Liberation and all. TPLF was so cruel, inhumane, and deadly that it was, quote, listed as a terrorist organization by the United States government in the 1990s and is still listed as one by the Global Terror Database because of its unfortunate habit of carrying out armed assaults in rural areas. The brutal regime killing its own people in the street, curb stomping them, bagging their heads, and shooting them. Tedros says that the global community blew this way out of proportion and got in a fight with the Human Rights Watch in a series of public letters. Here's Tedros's letter. Quote, Human Rights Watch encourages opposition violence in Ethiopia. That's from the Ethiopian Ministry of Foreign Affairs while Tedros was leading it. Eritrea is the Ethiopian version of Thanksgiving. Tedros's vile behavior extended across the entire continent of Africa.
TPLF's latest appeal for peace is said to be a crocodile tears at best. Many still express doubt whether the terrorist group, given its ample history of violence and treachery, would actually opt to a negotiated settlement. Shunning the government's peace initiative, the terrorist TPLF lied about Tigray's siege, violated the unilateral ceasefire, and lately invaded the Amhara region. Johannes Fantown has compiled views by some prominent politicians as follows. Let's have a look at it.
The TPLF invaded the neighboring Amhara state as the world was watching. Its brazen act dashed hopes of finding a negotiable settlement. However, many agree that if the proposed peace talks are to take place, the TPLF must publicly express respect for Ethiopia's territorial integrity and nullifies its so-called TDF, which is a flagrant violation of the constitution.
Regarding paramilitary units, the Ethiopian constitution gives the states the right to establish special forces in the police. It also allows them to have a militia based on their regional situation. The terrorist group has been waging war by arming itself with the weapons stolen from the Ethiopian defense forces and using the capricious human wave tactic.
Peaceful dialogues has been repeatedly offered by the Ethiopian government without any preconditions, but the TPLF rejected all these overtures at lightning speed.
As everybody knows, that the Ethiopian government was really wanted to end this problem, what is going on in northern parts of our country, in a peaceful dialogue way. But the one who, before 1 year, waged war against our military Ethiopian Defense Force, the TPLF armed group, and after when the Ethiopian government also announced a ceasefire from unilaterally, they left the Tigray region. This all they were calling Ethiopian government calling to peaceful solution to this problem.
The politicians further underscored that the TPLF must be disarmed before any negotiation could take place with it. Also, the TPLF must relinquish its outrageous claims of possessing a Tigray defense force or even worse, its portrayal of Tigray as a sovereign nation.
A senior researcher at the Institute of Foreign Affairs says there had never been any success in peace talks with TPLF in its close to 3 decades in power. Uhubek Zerfareda, who approached by ETV, underscored that TPLF is confusing the international community, carrying weapon in one hand and pretending to be peacekeeper on the other. Goshumel has more on that.
The government of Ethiopia has traveled a long distance to back the TPLF to the table. Declaring humanitarian truce, the Ethiopian government has shown its commitment to end the conflict via peace talk without any precondition. However, the terrorist TPLF launched the third round fresh attack against Ethiopia on August 24, 2022. Talking to ETV, senior researcher at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Uhubek Zerfareda, said TPLF had not any success story of peace talk during its reign for over 27 years.
If you go through all the entire history of TPLF, it has gone through by the end of its power. But they didn't. So everything has been solved through the gun, even in the internal crisis, within the party itself, and even right now, one of the generals, from the leaked information that we have already seen from, I can say from social media and so forth, their mind is, of course, is really indoctrinated with this war culture. So they have this idea of invincibility. They claim that they were fighting for these 17 years, whatever years, and they believe that they are the invincible people who can be beacon for others who are struggling for an genuine cause.
He also underscored that TPLF is perplexing the international community, carrying weapons in one hand and pretending to be peace seeker.
This stand of TPLF at this point of time, I don't think that it is to bring a sustainable peace. Had it been, if the TPLF was ready for a sustainable peace, there had been many opportunities, lost opportunities, where the government was making unconditional guarantee to the peace talks under the auspice of the AU. So what's changed is in relation to the government's position is now, though the government was consistently seeking for negotiated peace settlement, it was TPLF who had started this third round attack against the people and the force around. So in one hand, TPLF is coming with a white flag in one of his hands, and on the other hand, you find the gun in one. So they are trying to use a combination of this, what they call the diplomacy, and of course the arms.
We have accentuated that TPLF presenting itself a genuine force from Tigray peace talk, ignoring other forces in Tigray.
On one hand, I don't believe that TPLF is a representative for the peoples of Tigray and that is the interest of Tigray. There has to be a force in Tigray, a genuine force. If the people of Tigray they have any form of genuine questions for this, together with the federal government, there has to be a force representing the peoples of Tigray than this criminal group which is labeled as a terrorist. So coming to a table with a terrorist force and where there is a legitimate government, of course, this creates some sort of anachronistic process in the political history of the country.
In its fresh attack in Amhara and Afar regions, TPLF shelled various health facilities, religious institutions, and IDP camps, it was learned.
Professor of International Security and Dean of Basile School of International Affairs, Anna Fitzgerald said international law requires the humanitarian aid gates delivered and space and access given to the delivery of humanitarian aid under any circumstances. Referring to relief operation towards areas affected by conflict in northern part of Ethiopia, the professor said it is very difficult to properly undertake aid delivery when an insurgency group is in control of the governance structure of an area to be addressed. The Ethiopian government declared a unilateral ceasefire and declared a new indefinite humanitarian truce, but it is legitimate to a democratically elected government to protect the safety and security of the country's borders, its population, and its sovereignty. Professor Anna Fitzgerald explained that this ceasefire was one-sided, stressing that TPLF has to be held accountable for not declaring and implementing a formal ceasefire. A scholar called on Ethiopia and other African nations to produce high-quality analysis in the fight against cyber warfare backed by intelligence institutions. Talking to Ethiopian News Agency, a senior fellow at the American University in Moscow, Matthew Ahert, further criticized some actors in the West for stealthily supporting the TPLF. Kasaun Chani has more on that. Take a look.
A senior fellow with the American University in Moscow asserted some overseas intelligence institutions and a command and control fusion centers based in Africa being conducting information warfare to destroy Syria, which they have replicated to Ethiopia. He also indicated that some in the West really disapprove of peace in Ethiopia since peace is incompatible with their self-interest of exploiting resources.
The motive is to render Ethiopia ungovernable, to make Ethiopia incapable of carrying out the duties and the goals that it is set for itself, as well as for the broader region of the Horn of Africa and Africa as a continent more broadly, since Ethiopia does represent, I think, currently one of the strongest nations in all of Africa as far as having a sovereign capacity to carry out economic development through major projects, which is serving as an example for what other countries have the ability to do, as well as a robust foreign policy orientation towards creating alliances that are very positive with Gulf states, with other nations in Africa, with China, that any nation could do to strengthen itself and gain more capacity to end hunger, end wars, and end the sorts of problems that living under empire has created for all of us, especially those living in the global south. And so that example has to be destroyed. And one of the ways, one of the tools, is the use of terror operations, terrorist units, which we've seen across the Middle East. We've seen this across Africa and Mali, and Ethiopia has certainly been targeted for similar operations.
The senior fellow did the whole idea is to divide and conquer, to have a nation at war with itself on a civil war with separatist groups, ethnic nationalist divisions of a nation into tiny little segments. Here it further stated that global forces are pushing other countries who want destabilization and disintegration of Ethiopia. There is a broader global force whose motive is destroying nation-states like Ethiopia. He also criticized the leading United Nations figures for ignoring TPLF atrocities and abuses and failure to maintain the principles of the United Nations established force.
There is a consistent effort by leading figures within the United Nations to ignore the obvious use of child soldiers, the abuses that have been committed by the TPLF over even the ceasefire period and before that. The abduction of various UN officials who were operating within the Tigray region.
According to him, the abuses of his own UN officials were ignored by the upper management because they want to keep the wrong narrative that the TPLF is somehow honest rebels fighting for a just cause. The scholar revealed that forces that control most of the West are very dishonest about Ethiopia.
There is certainly a clear intention to support or give respectability to the TPLF and treat them as if they were an equal partner in discussions with the official democratically elected government of Ethiopia. So that is very dishonest.
The new forces dominating the world stage no longer see the idea of the world of cooperating nation states as compatible with the idea of what the world order should be. Scholar concluded.
It is stated that CNN is not a neutral media, rather it is a geopolitical establishment which is solely created to facilitate ways to control multiple countries in the world. Political analyst for Africa, Lawrence Freeman, sat with ETV and underscored the terrorist TPLF needs to be disarmed. Tigris has compiled the following report.
Right after the terrorist TPLF initiated the war nearly 2 years back, CNN and other media outlets launched a media molest or warfare against the people of Ethiopia, circulating false narratives time and time again, targeting to misinform the international community, contrary with the hard fact on the ground. While his Zoom interview with ETV, political analyst for Africa, Lawrence Freeman, stated that CNN is not indeed a trusted and neutral organization, rather it is a geopolitical establishment which is solely created to control multiple countries in the world.
The CNN is not a news organization. I can't get this through, Mark. the thinking of my friends in Washington, Ethiopian friends in Washington and in Ethiopia. They're not a news organization. They are an arm of a geopolitical establishment. They're not looking for the truth. They're looking to destroy, to weaken the government of Ethiopia, to deny the Ethiopian people the right to live in prosperous lives, lives with dignity and meaning, and not in poverty. So you have to forget this notion of them as a news organization and realize what they're out to do and what they're trying to accomplish. And they've identified themselves since the beginning of the war. So why do people still think they're a news organization? I don't. I'm not saying people shouldn't be interviewed by CNN, but when you're interviewed, know that you're dealing with the enemy and treat them as such and prepare yourself as such. And the Ethiopian government should attack CNN as the enemy and understand that they're an arm, a deployable arm of an international geopolitical oligarchical force. And if you don't understand that, then you're confused about what they're doing. I'm not confused. I see clearly what they're doing, and I've been watching them for decades, but in Ethiopia for the last 2 years.
Freeman urged that the next step to alleviate and sort out the right track to the conflict has to be disarming the belligerent TPLF.
Well, the first thing is understand what's going on. Knowledge is the best weapon. And I find sometimes that this is not understood with people in the government. This is part of a larger deployment. Look at what is the TPLF going to do now? They're going to continue to make military campaigns into the rest of Ethiopia, right now Afar and Amara. They may stop at a certain point and say, okay, we'll have a ceasefire. But then they will start up again. Because as long as they're armed, they are a danger to the nation state of Ethiopia. So as part of with the international community, if it had any morality and concern for the people of Ethiopia and for democracy, which actually elected the government of Abiy Ahmed, then they would make sure that a process has begun for disarming the TPLF. They have to be disarmed. They should be reintegrated into society. And Tigray has to be part, and all northern Ethiopia has to be rebuilt as part of a great economic infrastructure program for the country of Ethiopia.
He further added that if some Western countries truly believe in democracy, they should defend the government of Ethiopia, which is elected by the Ethiopians democratically.
If the Western countries, and my President Biden and Secretary of State Blinken, who babble about democracy every day, if they really believed in democracy, then they would be defending the democratic elected government of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, which they have yet to do. And they would be defending the policies of development for the people. So they don't believe in democracy, and they will not denounce and demand the disarming of the TPLF. My view is, and I know this is a harsh view, but as long as the TPLF remains armed, and as long as the great Western powers of Europe and the United States continue to give them tacit support, Ethiopia will be under constant struggle to survive and will not be able to accomplish all the goals it has set for its people.
In another development, Ethiopian Airlines Group announced that it has completed the first phase of its interterminal hotel built inside the Addis Ababa Bole International Airport. The hotel is physically connected to Addis Ababa Bole International Departure Terminal 02 with a short walking distance from departure gate and will be managed by Ethiopian Skylight Hotel as Ethiopian Skylight Interterminal Hotel. The two-phased project reached the completion of the first phase, availing 41 rooms for guests. Ethiopian Airlines Group CEO Mesfin Tasso said The extensive Ethiopian network brings millions of passengers through Addis Ababa each year. The second phase of the construction, which will avail the remaining 56 rooms, restaurant and other facilities, will be completed in October this year. According to the National Bank of Ethiopia directive, which became effective on September 5, individuals entering and departing the country in possession of local currency are now subject to new restrictions. Individuals may not hold local currency whose value exceeds $57 or 3,000 Ethiopian birr. The directive also sets conditions and circumstances under which Ethiopian residents and non-residents may possess and use foreign currency. In a statement, the National Bank of Ethiopia outlines the exact value of both the birr and foreign currency that residents may hold. For Ethiopians re-entering the territory of the country, the central bank said they are required to convert all foreign currency he or she is carrying at an authorized forex bureau for an equivalent sum in birr. Alternatively, they can deposit the forex into a foreign currency account within 30 days of returning to the country, the central bank added. For residents holding $4,000 or more, the NBE directive directed that such individuals should make a customs declaration. Finally, demonstrators continue to pressure the military for a return to civilian rule. In Sudan, over 116 demonstrators have been killed by security forces over the past consecutive protests in Sudan. Let's have a look.
Thousands of Sudanese protesters took to the streets of the capital, Khartoum, on Tuesday to press demands for a return to civilian rule following a military coup last year. Many carried posters criticizing the military. A solution can only be reached by achieving our demands. We'll keep on protesting. There isn't a time frame for the revolution. Once you fulfill our demands, the demonstrations will stop. Sudan has been rocked by waves of demonstrations since the armed forces led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan grabbed power in October last year. In July, Burhan pledged in a televised address to step aside and make way for Sudanese factions to agree on a civilian government. Civilian leaders, however, dismissed the move as a ruse.
Over now to a quick reminder of the headlines. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and his delegation arrive in Djibouti. Politicians underlined the need to disarm the TPLF before any negotiation could take place. Well, you have been watching ETV News. Thanks for your company and have a great time.